Good morning, welcome back to the channel. It's another fine, beautiful, sunny day here in eastern North Carolina. And today I'm going to start digging up my dahlias. Now, I'm going to try to show you the process that I go through when taking care of my dahlias, but I am not an end-all be-all authority. So this video is really just how I do it, which is going to be very similar to what you would see searching all over the interwebs. So I'm going to start digging up my dahlias, and I will process them and take you through that process of, again, how I take care of my dahlias. Now, again, in growing zone 8A, I do not need to take up my dahlias. I can leave them in the ground, maybe simply put just a little layer of mulch on top of them to help protect from winter freezes. But the ground here really doesn't freeze hard, not like it does when I lived in New York in growing zone 7A. The reason I'm taking up my dahlias is because I want to move them and put them in more of a dahlia specific area, and along here in the front of the vegetable garden I'm going to be planting boxwoods because eventually I want there to be a whole hedge of boxes. So let's get to it. So the first one I'm going to be digging up here is Franz Kafka, and I brought Franz Kafka with me from New York. It was one of the dahlias that I salvaged, and it's pretty much done. You can see no new growth. I did cut it back. So simply all you're going to do, if you do grow dahlias or you want to learn how to grow dahlias, again, not very hard. If I can do it, anyone can do it. You're going to want to, I don't know, gently dig around. And sometimes if you have a pitchfork or something along those lines, you can use that. And you're going to pry them up out of the ground gently, because again, you don't want to damage any of the tubers that are there. And I'll show you what I mean by tubers in a second. So you're going to want to brush the dirt off. So this is your dahlia, and all these are tubers. And these actually look pretty good. And you really don't see any. There was one damaged one which came off already, which is fine. So right now what you're going to do is give it a general inspection. There's some new dahlia, new tuber growth right there. There's some more new tuber growth, more new tubers. And then something like this would be an older tuber because it's darker colored. The darker the color, the older the tuber, I think. Again, I'm not 100% sure, but this guy is ready to go on to the next step. Now, it is very important, unless you don't care, but it's very important to tag and or label your tubers for all along the process if you want to keep the same varieties and know what they are when you plant them out. If you don't care, you can just skip the whole tagging step, but the tagging is somewhat important. I'm going to move this off to the side. I'll dig up a few more and then we'll go on to the next process. So this next one right here would be Marry Me. Now Marry Me still has some growth, but again, we got some freezing temperatures going on or coming up. And again, dahlias don't like freezing temperatures, they're tropical plants. So I'm going to just cut these back to a couple inches there to the ground. And then I'll do the same process. Again, if you have a pitchfork or a small handheld fork, you can use that as well. I'm just using a little hand shovel here. And I'm just going to push down and away from the edge of the plant. Again, trying not to hit those tubers or damage those tubers. Now with dahlias, you don't plant them too deep. Oh, this one's really in there. Ooh. So they shouldn't be too hard to get out. Of course, this one is making a liar out of me. And it's important that you don't damage the tuber. If you damage the tubers, you're gonna want to get rid of them because then they will become vulnerable to disease and rot. This one's pretty rooted in there. Okay. All right. So here we go. Here's another one. Here's all your tubers. You can see the stems coming out of the top. So here's an example of a damaged tuber. You can see where it's cracked. And I'll be cutting that off later before I put this guy to sleep. And here's an example of a newer tuber and then an old tuber. Also, when you're brushing off the dirt, be careful because the skins are tender. They haven't hardened up. It's almost like a new potato when you take it out of the ground. Don't rub it too briskly, otherwise you'll rub the potato skin off. Don't rub these too briskly, again, otherwise you could wind up taking off the outer layer of skin. And all of these stems that I'm cutting off, these can all go to the compost pile to be rotted down for fresh compost next year. There's a channel I like to watch called Dahliaholic, and it's a couple, Jeff and Heather in England, and they grow dahlias. Well, it's mainly Jeff. Heather helps out, but they grow dahlias, and Jeff has a lot of dahlias, and he has over the years learned very specific things that work for him, and that's what he does. So that's one of the things with dahlias. There is no, or actually I'd probably say most gardening, there's no really set in stone way to do these things. And honestly, there's going to be a lot of different varieties in what you see on the internet so far as taking care of the dahlias. The general principles will all be there, but a lot of different growers may try or do things a little differently in each circumstance. So far as the medium that they store the plants in, or how they store the dahlias at different stages. And I'll discuss some of that more in a minute. So now the next step is to clean your dahlias. Now you don't have to clean your dahlias. You can put your dahlias away dirty, as it were. But if you clean your dahlias, you can then check your dahlias at that point for any damaged tubers that look like they may be rotted. Remove all of those, because you don't want to store them that way. And then after that, after they've dried for a day or two, you can then do one of two things. You can then put them into their storage medium, and again, I'll talk about that in a minute, or you can turn around and look to divide them at that point. Now, I personally don't like to divide them at that point for a couple of reasons, but the biggest reason being is I can't find the damn eyes. I'm old and blind. So in the springtime, when the plant starts to wake up and it starts to put on some new growth, at that point you can then find the eyes easier on the tubers and then divide them. And then you can grow new plants from those divisions. You can also take cuttings. I think I'm going to do a whole separate video on that in the springtime. When the springtime comes, remind me about doing a dividing and taking cuttings from dahlias video, and I'll do one at that time if I don't forget. So again, you have to remind me. So hit the subscribe button, hit that bell icon to be notified of when I do post up a new video, and this way, again, you can remind me in the springtime. But for now, I'm going to wash the dahlias. I will then inspect the dahlias, and then I'll turn around and lay them out to dry. And then I'll show you how to store them in a storage medium. And I'll talk more about that when I get to that point. So let me get to washing the dahlias. So this next part really here isn't rocket science. You're just going to take a hose and you're going to go over all the dahlias, and you're basically looking to wash off the loose dirt, or the dirt that's on the dahlias. Now, they don't have to be spotless if you're worried or concerned about that. The point is, it's just so that you can wash off enough of the dirt. You can then see what's going on with the dahlia. And again, be able to inspect it so that you can store it. And this is an important part, because if you have rotted tubers or damaged tubers, they may rot over the winter when you're storing them. And then, see, that guy just fell off. That's no good. It's also why you have to be gentle with your dahlias. There you go. That one's easy. And if you've cleaned them, inspected them, removed the damaged tubers, it again increases your chance of having good dahlias in the springtime when you go to replant them. If they have disease or rot or damaged tubers, chances are you're going to have very little in the springtime when it comes to unboxing them and then going to plant them back out. You may have very few tubers that are well. So here's Ahoy Matey, and I'm just going to give this a look over. Now this dahlia here, this tuber here has a split in it, but that split seems to have healed over. So I think I'm going to leave that guy alone. Now that decision may come back to bite me in the ass later, but but for now, that'll be good. These tubers look good. Overall, this looks pretty good. This is some old rot here. We'll just take that off. Overall, Ahoy Matey looks pretty good. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trim this guy up a little bit. And then what that'll do, so for instance, you don't want really long stems. So you take them down to about 1 inch. And you may notice, and I don't know if you can tell in the picture here, but the inside of the stem here is hollow. That can harbor water. So the next step I do is I then go through and start taking off all these excess roots. Seriously, I need to clean these cutters. More importantly, I need to change the blade on those cutters. So I'm going to get rid of a lot of this excess root. Now, not everybody does this. There we go. But it makes for a little less mess. And also, it's easier to store them if you get rid of these excess roots. Now, in doing so, I just found this is a little rotted here. So what I may wind up doing, that'll come right off. Gonna get rid of that tuber. And I'll just cut that right back. There you go. Oh, that one's got a big hole in it. So we're going to pull that off. There we go. See the hole? Again, you don't want anything damaged in on your dahlias. It'll lead to rot, and that's never good. Rot or disease. Let's get rid of some of these more. So I'm just cutting these tails off, excess roots. And it'll just make the dahlia overall easier to store for the winter. And this one's ready to go. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to place them on the driveway here upside down, and that'll allow any excess moisture that's in the plant to drain out. This is also important. Again, you don't want to store your dahlias sopping wet. They will wind up rotting. So now this is black satin. We'll go through the process again. I'm going to cut the stems back to about 1 inch or so. Start trimming off some of this excess. Look for damage. That one should be okay. That looks okay. I'm going to cut that back a little bit. So now I'm making these cuts into the tubers here. And if I leave them out for a few days to dry, this should basically scab over, which is what we want. No open damaged tubers. All right, so overall, this tuber looks okay. Again, we'll place it upside down, we'll let it dry out, and then we'll put it away in storage medium. Okay, so here we are with all of my dahlias from in front of the vegetable garden, all pulled up and trimmed and ready for storage. Now, I did mention a bunch of times in this video already about storage medium. And what I mean by that is any material that's basically non-nutritious towards the plants. So you don't want to use fresh compost, you don't want to use fresh potting soil. You want to use something like vermiculite, coir, which is what I'm going to be using, newspaper, anything like that. Basically, you don't want the plants to be growing while in storage. You just want the plants to basically rest and wait until springtime when things start warming up, and then you do put them into a material such as compost or potting soil, so that they can then start sending out roots to start growing and thriving. So in the beginning of this video, you might have seen me pouring water into a bucket with a couple of bricks in it. Well, that's the coir. Let me show you that now. So this is the material, and it's called coir, C-O-I-R. I may be mispronouncing it, but basically it's it's coconut fiber, right? So, and they put it into these bricks, they compress it, and this way it ships quickly, but it add water and it all fluffs up. Now this material here is still a little too wet for me to be putting the dahlias into, but that's okay because the dahlias need to rest or dry out for a couple of days. Now, you don't want them bone dry. That's the trick. You just want them to drain excess water. They may be trapped in and amongst them so they don't start rotting while they're in your garage or basement. And all you simply do is take the dahlia itself, the tubers that you've now collected, and you can put them in a box, you can put them in a crate. You don't want to put them in necessarily like a sealed Tupperware container. They are still alive, they still need to breathe. You don't want the tubers getting excess moisture into them. So for instance, if you put them in Tupperware and you get a warm day, well, there's moisture still in the dahlias, that moisture evaporates, it has no place to go because it's in a sealed Tupperware container, and then it'll just start getting wet and damp in that container, and then it'll start rotting the dahlia. So you don't want that. So you want like a milk crate, a cardboard box, something along those lines. And again, you can put them into, you can wrap them up in newspapers, you can put them in coir, you can put them in vermiculite. Laura on Garden Answer, she puts all of her dahlias in vermiculite. It's a lot of vermiculite. It can get quite expensive. I put mine in coir. Klaus Dalby, he's a Dutch gardener. He wraps up his in newspaper, and all these are fine. You just have to find the storage medium that works for you. And if you're a first-time gardener growing dahlias, you may want to try maybe 1 or 2 boxes with vermiculite, another box with coir, another box with newspapers. Find what works for you. Everybody does something a little different. What's her name? Erin from The Impatient Gardener. She recently mentioned the same exact thing. Everybody does something different. You just have to find out what works for you. For me, coir works well. Now, there is another trick to all of this. Once you put them in their boxes and you cover them up, okay, you're gonna want to go back and check on them basically monthly. Check on them, make sure they're not shriveling up. If they do look like they're shriveling up, give them a little moisture. Take a spray bottle, like a spritz bottle, just give them a little light layer of moisture. They will wind up absorbing it. The material that you're using, again, used compost, which is what I believe Jeff and Heather use over on Dahliaholic. They use old compost, coir, any of these things. It'll let the moisture basically pass through or hold just a little bit of the moisture, keeping the dahlias just a little bit moist, preventing it from drying out. Now, if they do start drying out, and again, you spray them with the water bottle, don't panic. Don't panic. I have taken dahlia tubers, which look fairly shriveled, and I've put them in a little tub of water, basically for 24 hours, and they start to rehydrate. Now again, this will only work if the dahlia is only so dehydrated. If it's, sometimes obviously things are too far gone. Obviously a dahlia, a tuber which you take and you squeeze and turns to dust, that's too far gone. But if it looks like it's just a little shriveled up, you can put it in a little tub of water in the springtime. It'll start to rehydrate, and at that point you can then plant it out into your topsoil and whatnot. There's actually another channel, and I haven't seen the gentleman on in a long time, but his videos obviously are still up, because once you post up something to YouTube, it basically stays there forever. And it's the Small Gardener, or Small Garden Gardener, or just Small Garden. If I remember, I'll leave the links to all these below. He's an older gentleman. He was a gardener once upon a time in his younger age, and he still enjoys gardening in England. And he was actually the one who taught me the trick about the dehydration. And again, you can just take a tuber if it's just shriveled up and it doesn't look quite right. You can just take it, put it in a little container of water basically overnight, 24 hours, and then it should start rehydrating. And at that point, you know, again, if it's too far gone, it's too far gone. There's nothing you can do about dust. But if it looks like, you know, just you know, still a little bit there, but just, you can do that trick. But hopefully I cover all this in the springtime, and hopefully all of you subscribe. Hopefully you tell your friends, families, and neighbors and grumpy old guy across the street, and you hit the bell icon to be notified when I do post up a new video. that's going to be about doing it for today. If you haven't subscribed, obviously I keep mentioning that over and over and over again. Please subscribe so you don't miss a moment of me building out my garden here in eastern North Carolina on 1.5 acres. Follow along, get to see what I do, get to see what I plant, see how the garden progresses, and hopefully I learn something along the way, and hopefully you guys can teach me something along the way, or we can share information or that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying. Hopefully, maybe. That's going to be about doing it for today. I'm going to catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.